not qualified, certainly as a scientist or otherwise, to speculate points of origin.
Aero needs to bolster the quantity, quality, and diversity of data that it acquires and examines.
It's intriguing that Aero, the Office of All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon under the Director of National Intelligence, reports about objects they cannot identify because there are two possible interpretations. Either this office is not doing what they are supposed to do, which is to identify national security threats. And that could involve espionage by adversarial nations. That by itself is a very serious admission. The second possibility is that these are objects that arrive at Earth from outside the solar system, and they represent technologies that were not manufactured by humans, which is an even bigger story. It would be the most significant scientific discovery in the history of science. And so we are faced with two very serious possibilities. And what that means is that we need to develop better techniques, better data acquisition methods, such that we can infer the nature of objects like that.
Has there been any, to your knowledge, any communication with a non-human life form?
So the term communication is a bit of a trick word because there's verbal communication like we're having now. The problem is you also have nonverbal communication. And so I would say definitively yes, but from a nonverbal meaning, when a Russian reconnaissance aircraft comes into US airspace, we scramble two F-22s, and we are certainly communicating intent and capability. I think the same goes with this. We have these things that are being observed over controlled US airspace, and they're not really doing a good job hiding themselves. They're making it pretty obvious they have the ability to even interfere with our nuclear equities.
Former counterintelligence officer Luis Elizondo spoke about UAPs that could move at speeds of up to 3,000 Gs in what he described as being intelligently controlled. What's your take on this, and is it a priority to take these testimonies seriously?
Currently, there is electronics on artillery shells that are capable of sustaining 100,000 G. So we do have the technologies that allow very rapid accelerations, way beyond what the human body can tolerate, up to about 10 G. And so the fundamental question is whether the objects that Lou Elizondo talks about are manufactured by adversarial nations, or they represent technologies from outside the solar system. And of course, without seeing the data or the evidence, we cannot tell. It's very natural for government agencies to have retrieval and reverse engineering programs from crash sites, because that's one way of learning about the technologies of adversarial nations by direct analysis of the kind of equipment they use. And one might even find biologics in those sites because those devices might have had pilots. And so the existence of programs of this nature in government is not surprising. What would be surprising is if we have proof that they actually encountered data, either imagery or materials, that implies that these are objects produced outside the solar system.
And there seems to be a feeling that his return to presidency could open up the possibility of UAP secrets being released in the future.
The new administration might be more open to sharing information, but there is a fundamental question here. Obviously, some of those UAP are manufactured by humans, and it's probably a mixed bag, and we know of those. And then the question is, what about the others? And if the intelligence agencies are not confident that they're not human-made, they will probably not be welcoming any release of this data, because it may compromise information that is of national security importance. It's only in those cases where it's clear that human-made technologies cannot reproduce what we have, that the question will arise as to whether to share it with scientists openly, because it's a scientific matter. Government did that in the early 1970s. There were flashes of gamma rays detected by sensors in orbit around the Earth that were aiming to detect any nuclear explosions above the atmosphere by the Russians, just to make sure that they abide by a treaty not to have such explosions out there. And then every day or two, there was a flash of gamma rays detected. And at first, of course, it was classified, but then scientists in Los Alamos realized those flashes come from either the Milky Way galaxy or the universe at large. It was eventually realized that they originate from the edge of the universe, and therefore they are of great importance for science. And astronomers realize that those flashes of gamma rays actually originate from the birth of black holes in the cores of stars as they collapse. That collapse generates jets, and when the jets are aimed at the observer, they actually penetrate through the envelope of the star and shine as a bright flash of gamma rays from the edge of the universe. So we are seeing the birth of black holes at the centers of stars. And that's an example for how sharing information that was originally collected for national security purposes could be of great benefit to science. And that could happen in the context of UAP, as long as one is sure that they are not human-made. And I very much welcome any such initiative to share that information. We currently have an operating observatory at Harvard University that monitored the sky over the past year, and we just released the commissioning data from that observatory on about 500,000 objects. And we still are collecting data all the time. And hopefully in the coming months, we'll have even better data, because we'll have copies of the main unit at a separation of a few kilometers that allow us to triangulate and figure out the distances of objects, which would allow us to figure out their actual speed and acceleration. And at the same time, we're making copies of this observatory, one in Pennsylvania and another one in a third location. So altogether, we'll have 3 observatories operating by the summer of 2025. And I expect millions of objects to be monitored by then. And then the question is whether any of them, even if it's 1 in a million, is it anomalous and in ways that cannot be reproduced by human-made technologies. And of course, if we find any, we will write a paper just about that one and share it openly with the public. And stay tuned. The future is exciting. Also in 2025, there will be data from the Rubin Observatory in Chile that employs a 3.2 gigapixel camera to monitor the southern sky every 4 days. And it could find objects that are of technological origin that arrive to the solar system from outside, from interstellar space. Every few months, there might be such an object that would remind us of the first one, Oumuamua, that was the size of a football field, most likely flat in its shape, and was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without showing cometary evaporation. And if we find more of the same, we could study them with the Webb telescope, with all the instruments we have on the ground, and learn more about the nature of such anomalous objects. Of course, there would be also rocks and icy rocks that appear as comets. But the question is whether among all these rocks, there are some technological probes that were sent to interstellar space billions of years ago, because most stars preceded the sun by billions of years, and there was plenty of time for Voyager-like probes to make it across the entire Milky Way galaxy. My hope is that in the coming years, we'll collect exquisite scientific data on anomalous objects near Earth, because that's the only way for us to find the truth. It's not by listening to politicians or journalists. They just talk about things they heard. But the actual evidence will be collected by scientists. And once we have good enough evidence, it will be impossible to refute it. So my hope is that we will be flooded with data so that we can tell that an object is made of screws and bolts. It's not a rock. And moreover, it was never manufactured by humans because it behaves in ways that we cannot reproduce. And that will be a way for us to learn about our future in technology and science as well. Because if we have a smarter kid on our block, we better learn from that kid rather than ignore it.